On behalf of Dean Connie White Delaney and the entire School of Nursing at the University of Minnesota, we welcome you to the 4th Annual Planetary Health Guest Lectureship. My name is Teddy Potter, and I'm the director of the Center for Planetary Health and Environmental Justice at the School of Nursing. Now, some of you may wonder, what does soil, air, and water have to do with nursing? But nurses deeply understand that humans and the rest of nature are interconnected. We cannot have human health without environmental health, and we cannot have well-being without environmental justice. Every one of us is needed to restore and maintain the health of the entire biosphere. Since time immemorial, humans have known this relationship. But in the past few centuries, some of us have forgotten. That's why we're here today, to remember who we are and to rekindle our connections. I want to acknowledge the co-sponsors of today's event, the Center for Planetary Health and Environmental Justice at the School of Nursing, the Center for Indigenous People, Health and Nursing of North America at the School of Nursing, the University of Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership, the Circle of Indigenous Nations, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Office of Sustainability, and the Center of American Indian and Minority Health at Duluth. It's now my great honor to introduce Karen Diver, the Senior Advisor to the President for Native American Affairs.
Bujuanin, Karen Diver, Nindijana Kazaganashi Mung, Makwan Nindodem, Nagachi Wanang Nindujaba. Karen Diver, I am a citizen of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa up north. I am Bear Clan. I am joining you here today on the land of our brothers and sisters, the Dakota. These are their contemporary homelands. In other words, it used to be ours. All right. Thanks, I needed that. It's like a mental health thing. Okay, repeat after me. Minnow, Geezy, good. It is a good day. It is such a good day. You just spoke maybe your first word of Ojibwe. So when you see all of our wonderful PhD nursing students and our master's native nursing students and all of those who are working on health at the med school and all of these other places who are so committed to wellness in what we call Indian country. But wellness for us just isn't about our people, as you're going to hear more about. Our relatives are everywhere around us. And this is a different way of thinking in a Western-based institution, right? And this is a part of the challenge of my job, working in the Native American Affairs portfolio out of the President's office. I'm a former tribal leader. I was a presidential advisor for the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and now the President of the University of Minnesota. Why? Why do we need this? Because our relationship with Indigenous peoples in this land and then the communities that were served is often framed by the words, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry we did this. I'm sorry we're not doing better. My job is to say, what are the actions we can take and who needs to be at the table? So we're reframing it from I'm sorry to how may we be of service. How can we help you tribal nations and Indigenous people achieve your own self-determination, your own sovereignty, and help you with the goals that you have set out for your nations? We will not do to Indigenous people anymore, we will do with. And that, in a nutshell, is my job. Oh, don't clap. Some days I'm only marginal at it. But that doesn't mean I, don't get my licks in where I can. But some days I'm actually really stellar at it. And what I found in the University of Minnesota is we have a lot of really well-intentioned folks. Clueless sometimes, really smart and clueless at the same times, which is really curious to me. But anyway, but we have really good intentions. And so when you actually say things out loud, about how this institution can do better and how it was framed and harmed before, as a general rule, I have to say I'm quite heartened by people who say, oh, well, we need to do better. Those are the conversations that make it worth doing this work in this institution, is the intentionality for change and doing better. And I see so many in the people in this room who are part of that. So for that, I thank you, thank you. Because when we work together, we can be a premier institution that marries ancient thought and knowledge systems and knowledge creation with stuff that guys in Europe just figured out in the last 100 years. No, I'm just teasing a little bit. Well, maybe not. We get the point. It is my intense honor and privilege to welcome one of our Indigenous scholars to this space to challenge us and to open our eyes. Dr. Lila June Johnston is an Indigenous musician, scholar, and community organizer of Dene and Seseshtas and European lineages. Her multi-genre presentation style has engaged audiences across the globe towards personal, collective, and ecological healing. She blends her study of human ecology from Stanford, graduate work in Indigenous pedagogy, and the traditional worldview she grew up with to inform her music, perspectives, and solutions. She recently finished her PhD on the ways in which pre-colonial Indigenous nations shaped large regions of Turtle Island, otherwise known as the Americas, to produce abundant food systems for humans and non-humans alike. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Johnston.
Ya'at Eshik Greetings, my kin and my family. I'm so happy to be here with you all. I'm coming from Gallup, New Mexico. I left my sheep at home to be here, so that's how much you all mean to me. But she'e nanish ejitrachi ni nishlandon tsatsestas bashishchi ashin hedashiche do bilagana edashinele. I'm from the Nanisht Eje Trachitni clan of the Dene Nation. I know there's some Dene people here. Can you raise your hands? Oh, yeah, we're always everywhere, right? You can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of us. We're almost as bad as the Anishinaabe. They're everywhere too, and I love it. And obviously very deeply honored to Dakota relatives who I admire very much as well. And all of our ancestors here, as we're sitting here, I honor all of our lineages, our journeys, our backgrounds, and everything that brought us to this room, both the good and the bad, that we can compost it and bring it into something beautiful, no matter who we are. So a lot of what I'm to talk about today is actually about our roots as not just Indigenous peoples, but as Homo sapiens, who we, I think, truly are and were created to be. So, but yes, my clan, Nanisht Ejit Tachitni clan, comes from my mother. And so we get our last names from our mothers in Dene culture, not from our fathers. And I just always like to say that before I speak anywhere, to honor the matrilineal roots also of so many cultures. So you're welcome to record this either audio or video. I'm about to do like a fire hydrant's worth of information at you. I'm sorry in advance, but I think you will enjoy it. And it really is designed to break open our conception, not only of what Indigenous peoples have done on this land, which has been severely distorted to all of us. Most of us, if not all of us in this room, have been severely miseducated about what happened on this continent prior to Columbus's arrival, or Norse arrival for that matter. And also, therefore, what we can do again. Okay, so this, let's see if I have a little red light. Oh, ooh, oh, fancy, okay. Okay. So this is the oyster fisheries of the Florida riverbanks. This is an artist rendition, obviously, based on actual archaeological evidence of these massive oyster middens we find not only in Florida, but also in the Chesapeake Bay, throughout the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. We find a lot of quite beautiful evidence of massive food systems. So what I'm going to talk about today is my dissertation work, which if you want to check it out, is called Architects of Abundance, Indigenous Food Systems and the Excavation of Hidden History. And these are just some pictures. Here's the Ahupua'a system on the left, of the Hawaiian Kanaka Maoli people, where they would and still do create these watershed-based food systems that are very unique and very tailored to the watersheds. And these were their political districts as well. Talk a little bit about fire as a management tool, which some of you may know about. That is a Baure floodplain management system that is now kind of out of commission due to colonization, but was once a thriving fishery. And then that's my homeland, the desert alluvial farming techniques that my ancestors have done for a long time. I like what the planetary health framework talks about, nursing in an age of ecological instability. And I loved on the left, these are the 5 pillars of their movement here at University of Minnesota. The Anthropocene and health, acknowledging humans have created this issue. Movement building and systems change, systems thinking that it's not just, oh, let me check your blood pressure, but like, why is your blood pressure so high? Oh, because colonization destroyed all your foods. Oh, okay. So it's sort of a bigger thing, right? Equity and social justice, obviously. And then the core being interconnection with nature. And I love this picture that I performed a copyright infringement on from their website of the lungs and the forest being one and the same. So I think this picture really adequately shows what Teddy and her team are doing, beautiful work they're doing to say that the health of the earth is the health of the people and vice versa. So it's really exciting that as nurses, I know not all of us are in the nursing profession here, but I hope I give you some tools and frameworks and lenses through which you can see the world to actually create the planetary health that is required to obviously have human health or any other type of species health. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this this framework to honor that we are the earth and the earth is us. So first thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go through a series of case studies, examples of indigenous food systems that really blew my mind when I started this research, and hopefully will blow your mind too. So one thing I like to talk about, oh yeah, so I'm going to go through these case studies, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways in which this applies to all of us as human beings and what we can do to reclaim these systems and recreate these systems. So the Shawnee are indigenous to what we now call Kentucky, and they have these huge chestnut groves back in the day. And the chestnuts actually went almost completely extinct. About 98% of them dwindled due to a blight, a fungus. But this used to be a very important food source for not only humans, but a lot of different species. And they grew from Maine all the way down to Georgia. So they used to say a squirrel could run from Maine to Georgia from the treetops of the chestnuts. It was such an important part of the Eastern ecosystem, and now it's nearly completely gone. So it's kind of insane how vital these were. You could see how these old growth chestnuts were just massive. On the left is a Tsalagi family, a Cherokee family with one of their chestnut relatives, just to give you an understanding of how massive these groves used to be. And on the right-hand side, we see a chestnut that is allowed to grow and billow out, allowed to, I'm gonna go on this side because I feel like I'm in that guy's way. Allowed to billow out. And when you space the chestnut trees, you allow them to have enough sunlight, water, and nutrients. But colonial culture did not understand that. and they started to let the forest kind of grow on its own without tending it, clipping it, burning it, pruning it, thinning it. And that's how the blight and the disease took over, was because all these trees were really close together, which actually created compromised immune systems. Because when you have many, many trees all in one place, like we see out here in the forest these days, you have a lot of sick trees competing for limited sunlight, nutrients, and water. Just like a garden, you wanna space stuff out so everything has space to grow, and our ancestors understood that. So part of chestnut grove management, which I'm about to show you in a second, was burning. Because when you have your old growth chestnut here and another here, maybe a hickory nut over there, maybe a black walnut over here, and you have a burning every fall, you burn away the little saplings that are trying to come up, and you basically continually eliminate competing vegetation that compete with the trees that you have selected to be your food forest. So fire, ironically, we might not think, but is an extremely nourishing force for forests. And what we see on this red line here is that 3,000 years ago, this is time on the left-hand column, the entire forest composition shifted. This is a fossilized pollen diagram, which shows the presence of cedar pollen throughout time, hemlock pollen, oak pollen, chestnut pollen, hickory pollen, black walnut pollen, etc. And the bottommost layer of the sediment core, so you pull out a core from a lake and you analyze the fossilized pollen, is the oldest sediment. So time kind of goes up and becomes newer and more closer to today as you go up. So as you can see, about 3,000 years ago, cedar took a dive, right? There's not a lot of cedar. Oak makes a comeback, and then look at chestnut. Comes out of nowhere, roaring. And then you got hickory nut also coming in strong. You get black walnut coming out of nowhere about 2,000 years ago. Where did that come from? You have also sunflower coming in, it's hard to see, but goosefoot and plantain and dog, all these medicinal and edible plant species coming in. And on the right-hand column, you have the fossilized charcoal. So this is sort of our proof that fire was a very steady presence as soon as this food forest came about, indicating most scientists interpret this to mean that Shawnee ancestors 3,000 years ago created a biodiverse food forest in Kentucky out of thin air and managed it consistently for 3,000 years without end. So this just goes to show when the colonists came to this country, they would always marvel at these splendid natural parks, right? You've probably seen that, some of you nerds out there. Oh, there was it was a park-like environment. They always say that because it was a garden. We didn't just plant little orchards. We managed entire forests. We grew forests. And so the chestnut groves from Maine to Georgia are extremely anthropogenic, meaning this was a man-made food system. And that's part of our heritage as Indigenous peoples. And that heritage is erased when we say, oh, look at this wild forest, or look at this pristine nature, untouched nature, this mythology that wilderness is what we got to get back to. Well, actually, a lot of the country, if not all of it, was never wilderness to begin with. It was a highly curated garden. Okay, going to the other side of the continent to the Pacific Northwest. The clam gardens of these nations in the Pacific Northwest are actually designed to augment clam habitat. So this wall here is actually man-made. And those walls that those folks are standing on are man-made as well. And these rock walls have been radiocarbon dated to also be 3,000 years old. So it's very exciting to think that human beings augmented this clam habitat, because clams like calmer, stiller waters. So when you build these walls, when the high tide comes up, it'll get captured on the way down by these walls, and these walls will capture warmer waters, sediment, etc. And this was actually done on massive scales. This doesn't really show you how massive this Quadra Island area is. But 35% of the coastline, we find these 3,000-year-old rock walls where they augmented clam habitat. And what's really fascinating about this is that this was not only created for humans, but they honored that the minks, the water birds, the different types of species would come and eat the clams as well. So a lot of indigenous food systems are non-human centric, meaning they're designed to feed everyone. So yeah, we like to talk about that. Like, instead of having a little fishery, you augment entire coastlines, entire clam habitats to feed your people. And a really cute thing, well, it's not cute, it's amazing, but it's also cute, is that they say the clams have their own nation, the clam nation. And I think we will know we are an evolved society when we can pick up a clam and say, you are equal to me. That's when we will get to our true civilized form. So now I'm going to go to the grasslands of the United States, as it were, Turtle Island. Native American grassland pyromanagement, in other words, burning the land again, actually augments the grasslands. And so one author said, the Illinois Confederacy shaped and altered much of this region as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, they made the grasses hospitable for grazers and managed prairie as a game reserve to maximize productivity. In other words, we did not need to cage cows in a big fence. What we did was we burned the land, and very soon after that, what comes up but nutrient-dense grasslands, which are fed by the ashes of that fire. And those ashes bring in nitrogen, phosphorus, all types of fertilizing agents. And so, funnily enough, the more you burn the land, the healthier it is. And so you also open up meadow. Again, if you don't burn and thin the land, it's going to collapse into shrubs, it's going to collapse into mesic forests, and you're going to be bushwhacking in there, trying to get through, because that's part of Mother Earth's way. She just grows everywhere, right? So when you burn, you're actually opening up prairie, you're opening up meadow, and you have these pyro-adapted plant species as well. The Miamia Nation has a lunar calendar, and their September moon is called the grass burning moon. The Miamia Nation, if you haven't heard of them, are really cool. They're in the Ohio River Valley. They have a big center at Oxford University, which is different from the English Oxford one. Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And they have a cool center where they're revitalizing their language. And one cool thing about indigenous peoples across the country is we have these lunar calendars. And they have secrets encoded in them of how the land used to look and how the land used to be managed. So the grass burning moon is correspondent to our Gregorian September moon. And this is what they say about it. In Sashakolios Kilswa, which is the grass burning moon, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and open seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. So fire was so important to indigenous peoples across the board. Burning the land was our number one, or maybe I should say our most influential tool, that we named our moons after them. That was how important. A lot of these lunar moons talk about our obligations, our seasonal obligations. There's a chestnut moon, of like, oh, now we gotta all harvest chestnuts, to keep the cycles going, to keep life flowing. And so the grass burning moon is our way of saying, of proving to the world how important and how institutionalized burning the land was. And what you have is a vast variety of pyro-adapted species, like echinacea. Does anyone take echinacea when they're sick? A couple people. That is a pyro-adapted species. That is an indigenous species to this land. That's one of many, many medicines that they noticed we were using and copied or sometimes stole. But echinacea thrives after fire. And what happens, you have these seeds with very thick husks, and the fire actually breaks those husks down. And so these seeds need fire in order to germinate. This is a great book called Forgotten Fires. It was written in 1908, but this guy was more nerdy than probably all of us combined. He went through every part of the country and dug up any citation he could find of observations of Native people burning. And we burned everywhere. And it's such a fascinating book. I'd highly recommend it. So this prairie in Texas, where the bison are, really flourished after fire. If you go to this exact same place today, which I have been, it's all shrubland. There's no prairie. And so interestingly, fire and buffalo have this really important relationship as well. A lot of people imagine natives, with their little bow and arrow, right, chasing the buffalo across the prairie. No, the buffalo followed us, followed our fire. And we opened up buffalo habitat as far east as Pennsylvania. People don't really remember that. We had buffalo in Pennsylvania. As far south as Louisiana. There was bison all over this continent, precisely because of human fire, opening up pasturage for them consistently. And not only opening it up, but keeping it open through routine seasonal burning. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears to Bolivia. The Baure people in Bolivia created these really extraordinary earthen berms, earthen walls that served as funnels. So it's a floodplain aquaculture where the water would come up during the rainy season. And then as it receded, they had all kinds of interesting ways of kind of making the water flow here, making the water flow there. They created canals. You can't see it very well, but this is an artist rendition of canals. They would plant fruit trees along the earthen berms, and these funnels would funnel the water into pools that they would create. So you could have a perennial supply of fish even in the dry season, because you kind of engineered the landscape to catch fish. And so you're all good all year. And so you have your fruit trees, you have your fish, and you have your escargot, a lot of snails, and the fruit would attract game animals. So you have this huge food system that otherwise would not exist without human engineering, eco-engineering, you could say. So they had forest islands, they had settlement mounds where they'd build stuff up so that when it rained real high, they'd stay dry. Causeways and canals, ring ditches. They had their raised fields up here where they would grow their agricultural stuff. The reservoirs, the fish weirs are the fish funnels. So it was a really complex system. And here's an aerial photograph. And mind you, this was destroyed in the 1500s. So even 500 years of environmental degradation, we can still see remnants of this old system. Over 14 square kilometers of, 14 linear kilometers of earthen walls that were created. And the amount of area they managed was massive. That black dotted line is the various floodplains, the watersheds that we find this type of technology. So it kind of flies in the face of this notion that Native people are just hunter-gatherers, right? I actually really don't like that term, because when you're a hunter-gatherer, to me, you're kind of just hoping you find a berry, right? You're just hoping you find a deer. And you're like, gosh, I've lived here for tens of thousands of years, but I still don't know if I'm going to find a berry this season. When you live somewhere for so long, you're going to create systems that support a predictable perennial food supply. You're going to learn how to curate the land. And we learned to work with the land in ways that really augmented its life force, not just for us, but for all life around us. So instead of hunter-gatherer, I've used the term gardener. We gardened the land. We were architects of this abundance. We designed it intentionally. And the big kicker is not for ourselves alone, but for the whole system. What a concept. That maybe we're here to serve life. Maybe Creator gave us these big brains so that we could be these gardeners to help life flourish. So now going to my territory. So the Ashiwi people, aka Zuni people, are our neighbors. My clan means the Zuni Tachini. So somewhere back there, I have a Zuni grandma. But so what would happen is we would plant our gardens at the base of we still do this, I shouldn't say it past tense, plant our gardens at the base of small watersheds. And so every time it rains, we're in the desert, right? We're desert people. Monsoons come July, August, and September. We need those monsoons. Those monsoons are everything. So when they come, we are ready. So when the monsoons come and you plant your field at the base of small watersheds, it kind of captures that ephemeral, episodic flood that will come in. And this is like a brush dam. So you want to slow the water down, right? Permaculture people will remember that. Slow it and spread it. So you would also call this alluvial farming because we would plant in these alluvial fans. And I like this because, this is a funny diagram. This is weather. But weather, watershed management means you're putting it where the water flows. And not only does water come into these fields, but the real kicker is that nutrients come in. Because all up in the upland soils, there is nitrogen, phosphorus, soil organic matter. And so every time it rains, it not only is injected with a shot of water, but a shot of fertilizer. So some of these fields we've radiocarbon dated to be 1,000 years old. And you don't have to let them stay fallow. You can plant them year after year because they're constantly being recharged with nutrients. And this is how we created these fields without any outside irrigation or fertilizer. Beautiful corn, nada. So yes, I like to talk about this because it kind of talks about going where Mother Earth is already flowing, right? We're not piping water way over here or building a dam or trying to pretend like we could do better than her. We're just dovetailing with her. We're dovetailing with what she's got going on. And in the process, it's very economical because you don't have to pay to export fertilizers across the country. You don't have to pay to make a huge piping system. You just honor where the water is, and you honor, some people call that water sovereignty. Let the water be where it wants to be. And go where it is, kind of like the Baude people. They're just, oh, here's a big floodplain. There's so much going on here. What can we do here, And so, yeah, I like to talk about that. Going to Australia, the Gunditjmara eel farms. This is a 6,000-year-old eel farm. So what happens with eels is they are an catadromous fish species, meaning they spawn in the ocean and then they travel up the tributaries to hang out and grow old, marry. And then they come back down and spawn in the ocean again. So it's the reverse of salmon, right? Salmon will go up to the freshwaters to lay their eggs. And then when they hatch, they'll all go out to the sea and hang out. Very few species can do both freshwater and saltwater, but the eel can and the salmon can and some others can. So why I say that is just to say that there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of eel traffic going up and down the rivers because that's how they do. They go over here and they go over here and they go back and then they go back. And that's how they've lived for thousands of years. So being the intelligent people that they were, the Gunditjmara said, hey, there's a lot of eel coming back and forth here. So they created these eel pathways, 6,000-year-old basalt eel pathways, where they would funnel the eel into certain places. They had whole little eel nurseries where they would, and they actually just revitalized this recently. It was drained for cattle. The whole system was drained for cattle like 100 years ago, and they finally brought it back. So it's one of those few success stories. It is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is an eel trap. So the eel will go in that little funnel and then you have dinner. And so you can imagine these people have this 6,000-year-old relationship with the eel. So even though they do eat the eel and they do kind of traffic the eel into pools where they would have perennial supplies of eel, they still had a deep respect for the eel. And they even, again, say the eel is our relative. The eel is our equal. And so really what guides this whole system is a profound ethic of respect. And clearly it worked because they didn't wipe out the eel. And they said, just as the eel feed us every year, our duty is to feed the eel. Make sure we let most of them go so they can have their families. Make sure that we keep the rivers clean for them to come back and forth. And it's kind of like a covenant of you take care of us, we'll take care of you. And they've lived symbiotic like that for 6,000 years. Going down to the American South, probably should hurry up. This is an indigenous bamboo species. They call it cane. I don't know if y'all knew that, but we have a really important bamboo species in this land that also, unfortunately, its habitat has been destroyed by almost 98%. So why do I want to talk about cane? Because cane also was a curated human managed system. Without humans, the cane would cease to exist. And arguably without cane, the humans would cease to exist. So this is a big cane break in the middle. This is an example of one that's kind of left to its own devices. It will grow, 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 and just like those forests with tons of trees close together, it will choke itself out. Limited nutrients, limited sunlight, limited water. It will actually dry up and die. So the reason cane needs humans is to constantly burn it, constantly open up canopy. And cane, interestingly, when you burn it, it grows back stronger. The culm will create more bamboo in the wake of fire. And so fire was a really important way of maintaining the cane breaks, burning them, and also that brings that ash into the cane soil system as well. And the cane is really fast growing, so it was used for all kinds of things. They're beautiful Muskogee cane weavers. It's kind of like how bamboo today, they use it for everything. They made arrows, flutes, rafts, housing, adornments, earrings, cute stuff. And so it was just a really part and parcel of everybody's life that the cane was them and they were the cane. And sadly, when the colonial culture came, they noticed that wherever there was cane, there was really good soil systems underneath. Because again, they'd been burning them, trampling them, and bison love this. So the bison would poop in it, etc. And not just pandas who like bamboo. And so the bison had a part in it, and to create these really rich topsoils. So you've heard the term raising cane. They would raise it to the ground, they'd burn it to the ground and plant cotton, plant barley, plant wheat. So a lot of the system of horrific slavery and horrific extractive crop systems led to the demise of indigenous cane breaks, which, like I said, are now to less than 2% of their original habitat. It's an endangered species. There's two types. There's giant cane and there's switch cane. And both were and are very important to the cultural life of Southern indigenous peoples. And this is how the oppression of our African relatives is absolutely intertwined with the oppression of indigenous peoples. And arguably, the oppression of colonists themselves, because they're not really winning either, right? None of us win in this system where everything dies. So we're trying to bring the cane back. This is sort of a diagram I tried to make of how the humans would feed the cane fire, which would then feed the buffalo would feed the humans, and the humans would feed the cane fire. And so there was sort of a bit of a cycle of humans, buffalo, and cane. And this is the bison belt on the left. Like I said, the presence of bison in this continent is much, much more vast than most of us think. We think they're like in Montana and maybe a little bit of South Dakota. My Dene relatives in the room will probably know of a little town in New Mexico called Iambeto, which means Buffalo Springs. So even though there's no bison there today, we know through these place names there used to be bison everywhere, including, as you can see, almost the entire South. So the bison were really, really present. And my friend Marcus Cloud, who some of you may know, just bought 1,000 acres or more in Alabama and created a Muskogee language immersion eco village where he brought bison back to Alabama. So it's very exciting. Exciting stuff going on. Yeah, I think that's it. Going to Chesapeake Bay, present day Washington, D.C. This area we know has so much oyster history. And the Smithsonian said ancient Native American methods may be key to sustainable oyster harvests. Because today, less than 1% of the original famous Chesapeake oyster exists. The population is nosedived, it's barely even there. So the Smithsonian said it. We've been saying it for 500 years, but now the Smithsonian said it, so maybe people will listen. But anyways, these are the types of archaeological sites we find where massive amounts of oysters were deposited. So what a bunch of nerds did was analyze the oyster shells, see how old they are and how big they were throughout time. And we know that for 3,000 years, Piscataway ancestors, who are the indigenous peoples of Washington, D.C., not only supported an oyster fishery, but thrived off of it for 3,000 years straight. And that over time, the shells actually get bigger. So not only did they take care of this, you could say they made it better over time. And these oysters just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So yeah, due to dredging and eutrophication, or like the leaking of all the synthetic fertilizers into the bay from upstream farms, it's really damaged the oyster population. But another thing we're trying to revitalize. I think I'm gonna go ahead and skip to, these guys are really cool, but yeah. So I'm gonna skip to here in the interest of time. I like to end on this one because it's just so vast. Okay, so the Mebengokre people, aka Kayapo, create these Amazonian dark earths. So that whole dark horizon of soil on the left is anthropogenic, meaning it would not exist without this very, what's the word? Effective composting method of indigenous peoples in the area. And so what it is a lot of burning, right? Burning the land, bringing that ash into the soil. There's a lot of burying of ceramics to help with water retention. Whenever their pots were done, they would break them and put them in the soil. Old termite mounds, old crop residues. They're just experts at building soil, and they still are. So this guy's showing off his black loamy soil that his ancestors have tended for thousands of years. And I didn't know this, but Amazonian soils are actually very nutrient poor. They're very clayey, which is why people had to work so hard to bring out this fertility. And every black dot, and mind you, this is a sizable chunk of South America. That's a lot of South America. Every black dot is where we find Amazonian dark earths. So you could very viably say that the Amazon rainforest as we know it is man-made, or at the very least co-created in a partnership between humans and nature. That we actually created these soil systems that give rise to the Amazon we all know and love today. Very different, right? Than like, oh, I'm going to the jungle to see the wild rainforest that just magically appeared. It's like, no, actually that rainforest owes its very life to the foundation of soil that it sits on, which is actually co-created by humans. So it's very exciting. The scale at which indigenous peoples influenced the land, gardened the land. And this next slide is to prove that it's not an indigenous thing, it's a human thing. Because we find the same stuff in Norway. We find the same stuff in Africa. We find the same stuff in Asia. We find the same stuff in the Pacific Islands. Every human being has these ancestors who created these, co-created these worlds. They were not victims of circumstance. Intentional fire management in the Holocene with emphasis on just ignore that hunter-gatherer part, in the Mesolithic in Norway. Intentional fire management. So look at this quote. It's almost exactly the same as what we read in the Illinois Confederacy quote. Anthropogenic burning was different from natural fires in Norway. The fires set by people were smaller and less intense, true. They were predictable, almost immediately productive, creating mosaics in a complex pattern of vegetation of burnt and unburnt patches. Because they reduced available fuel, they provided protection against the disruption of natural fires. That last sentence means the more you burn, the more you prevent catastrophic fires, because you're keeping the fuel loads down. California only has these massive fires because they outlawed our fire. Native people used to burn up and down California, and we weren't allowed to. So the forest gets crazy, an overgrown thicket, starving for nutrients and water. Then you tack climate change on top of that. These are dried out, sick trees, a tinderbox waiting to catch on fire. So you need to burn frequently, ironically, to prevent burning. So, but this mosaics in a complex pattern of burnt and unburnt patches, that's really cool. It's exactly what my advisors at Stanford talked about in Australia with the Mardu who burn. They call it mosaic burning. So what that means is you burn this patch over here, you let it regrow for a year. You burn this patch over here, you let it regrow for a year. Meanwhile, that one's regrown for 2 years, and so on and so forth. So each little patch is in a different stage of regrowth. And each stage has a different set of flora and fauna. So each patch has a different makeup, species makeup. And that's how you can augment biodiversity in the land is you burn a little bit here, let it regrow, burn over here, etc. So everything's kind of in a different stage of regrowth. So it's very exciting. And the Holocene, mind you, where are we? The Holocene means 11,000 years ago or less. So we're talking thousands and thousands of years ago that our Norwegian ancestors were doing this. Okay, I'm rounding the corner here. So Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design. I don't know if that's a good name or not, but it's the best I could come up with. And I want to talk about humans as an emissary of the creator. The creator, in the Yoruba language in West Africa, the word for human being is chosen one. And it doesn't mean the human being is so important they're above all other animals. On the contrary, it means the creator chose us to be the stewards of the land. He gave us the assignment to care for this place. And so when people do this, they're living out their deepest design. They're living out their deepest purpose, is to be gardeners of the land, not for ourselves alone, but for all life. It's almost as if to say creator had all these children and said, okay, you babysit all, you're the babysitter, help take care of people, make sure they're fed, make sure their diapers are changed. And that's not to say other animals don't have their roles and their purposes as well. We all have an ecological role, whether it's a salmon or an eagle or a pine tree or an oak tree or a human or a tiny microscopic microorganism. We all have a role. But why on earth would humans be the only species that doesn't have a role? That doesn't make sense. We have a role, and we're meant to be the guardians, the stewards, the caretakers, the gardeners of the land. So I like to talk about the difference between the hardware and the software. A lot of people say, oh, humans are bad, as if this body is bad. This manifestation of a creature is bad. But I don't think we are inherently bad. It's our software, the way we think, our worldview, our priorities, what's important to us. That is what can be corrupted, I think. But the Homo sapiens is not a bad creature. In fact, it's a magical creature. I mean, look at everything that it's done. Like, how cool. How cool that we have the power and the capacity to create these magical systems. This is who we are as Homo sapiens. This is what our birthright is and what we've been able to do. And so when we think of it that way, clearly the Homo sapiens is not a bad thing. What I think can be bad at times is our software. What the program is that we operate on, the programming that guides our behavior. A lot of this is not our fault, it's inherited, right? And that is what we need to work on as people who have the full power to make the world better for our future generations. So one of the softwares that I like to talk about is the metaphor of the bird bath. Well, what is a bird bath? It's a gift you give to birds, you put it in your yard. You don't really get anything from it, right? It's just a little gift you've given to a species outside of your own. This is part of indigenous software, is this constant gift giving to other species. Another example is the clam garden. That's a huge bath, right? That's not just a little bird bath. They gave the clams a whole pool. That was their gift, not just to feed themselves clams, but the minks and the otters and the water birds. So this notion of giving love letters to the land, giving giving homes to the land, even the burning, you're opening up habitat for bison. You're saying, here you go, guys. Here's some nice, fresh green grass. And fire not only brings those fertilizing nutrients through the ash, it also increases the water filtration rates. It also increases the microbiology, stimulates the activity of microbiome in the soil. It does so much things. So we're kind of saying to the buffalo, like, hey, we made you some grass over here. Come have lunch, So that gift we're giving, the milkweed, some of you might know about the milkweed. It's this precious plant that so many beings feed off of, whether it's bees or butterflies. I've even seen birds just like attach to the side of a milkweed stalk and start eating the seeds. So one of the elders I interviewed in my dissertation said, I grow milkweed. That's my gift to the earth. I make sure the milkweed is good. Whatever you do, make sure the milkweed's good. So that's part of our software. But the IRED rudder that steers the ship, that software that guides the behavior, that program that we operate on is, generally speaking, respect, reciprocity, restraint, reverence, relationality, responsibility to homeland. That notion of creator put us here to be responsible for this place, and regeneration. This is the software of indigenous food systems, generally speaking, based on what I was reading. And this is the software we can imagine if our university was based solely on this. And I think you guys are pretty close, much closer than a lot of universities. I'm sure maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but just the fact that you even have a truth report, we're nowhere near there at University of New Mexico, I assure you. Imagine if this set of values governed our banking system. Whoa, right? Imagine if this set of values governed our government. There wouldn't be war, right? And I know this is kind of pie in the sky, but I'm saying we have to really tend the garden of our mind and our heart in order to properly tend the garden of the earth. So important. Everything starts in here, actually. According to my Nsahakes, the thinking, my culture says that's the eastern mountain, that's where it all starts, in our minds. And so we have to heal that part. Here's a really cool software, right? If we're talking about this software of the brain, we're going to talk about the Anishinaabe, 7 grandfather teachings, right? This is their value system that drives everything they do. Humility, wisdom, love, respect, bravery, truth, honesty. And each of these has a corresponding animal that goes along with it. How cool is that software? It's so much better than profit maximization. That's the software most of our country is governed by, is how can I make the greatest profit here? Anyone ever taken an econ class? How insane is that stuff? I went in, I was a little freshman at Stanford. I was like, oh, okay, econ. And they said, we found everything on 2 assumptions. 1, there's not enough for everyone. And 2, everyone is selfish. And all of our models are based on this. And I'm like, you need to get off that stage, sir. Wow. You need to let my grandma get up there and teach these people how to live because you're doing it all wrong. So we're oh yeah, we're out of time. So that's that. Thank you all for listening. So I'm gonna sing a song because I know, like, talking to your brains is only gonna go so far. All right. Great. Oh yeah, this is you can ask for the Q&A. I guess we're doing this is the way you get to ask a question, basically. So if you have a question, we're gonna Q&A after this song. That's kind of how you insert your question, and then they moderate it. And yeah. Indigenous people, shine your light, we are equal, yeah, yeah. I remember the days when our prayers were illegal. I remember the days when being Indian was lethal, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had a rough past, but get ready for the sequel. Get ready for the glorious comeback of our people. Oh, yeah. Rise up, all you warriors of love, all you answers to the prayers of our ancestors from above. I could feel it in my heart. Can you feel it in your blood? I could hear the seventh fire calling us to wake up. All nations rise. Rise up, 'cause now's your time. We don't have to hide anymore, 'cause now's our time. With forgiveness as my bow and my prayers as my arrows, pull it back and let go. I watch them fly like sparrows. Have hope, have hope. With compassion as my shield and faith down to our marrow, we will walk the pollen path even when it gets narrow. Yeah, yeah. Resurrect. Yes, you can bet that we've seen the single mama raising children on the res. We've seen domestic violence tear apart what we have left. We've seen the alcohol take it all and leave us dead. We've seen the children take their own lives when they can't take the dread anymore. No, we can't take the dread anymore. Or, no, I won't take the dread anymore. 'Cause we can't take the dread anymore. It's a war. But we've seen it all before, and now we know we can change it, 'cause that's why we were born. We know we are the ones that we have been waiting for. Yes, we are the ones that Grandma has been praying for. So rise up, all you warriors of love, all you answers to the prayers of our ancestors from above. I could feel it in my heart. Can you feel it in your blood? I could hear the seventh fire calling us to wake up. Pueblo hermoso, levántanse, es nuestro tiempo. No tienes que esconderte más, porque ahorita es nuestro tiempo. This next verse is in Spanish to honor all the indigenous peoples who live south of the imaginary border that has divided a continent that was once very much connected. Mujer indígena, Tú eres tan sagrada y traigas medicina de tu suelo todavía, a pesar del abuso de tu cuerpo y tu tierra. Respetamos tus ancestros y la suya cultura, hombre indígena. Tú eres honorable y yo veo la fuerza que todavía sobrevive a pesar del abuso de tu raza venerable. Yo respeto tus ritos, tus danzas, tus padres, guerreros del amor y guerreros de la paz. Sí, no vamos a escondernos más. We are warriors of love. We are warriors of peace. And we will not hide ourselves anymore. All nations rise up, 'cause now's your time. We don't have to hide anymore, 'cause now's our time. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I like that song because it's all nations rise. You know, I think I talk about hiding, and Teddy and I were talking about I'm half white, half European, and like those women who are burned as witches, you know, had to go into hiding as well. And no matter who we are, where we're from, like it's time to bring our medicine out and honor our ancestors and the medicine that we all come from. Okay.
Great. So we've got some wonderful questions after that beautiful talk. Thank you so much. Thank you. How do you recommend we bring these ideas to healthcare and nursing? It feels like we're so wasteful and disconnected from nature, but also in the operating room. It's tough to imagine what and how things could change.
Right. I think Teddy's work of prevention is a big one. We're so busy putting out fires in the operating room, or so busy putting out fires in the dialysis lab, and all of the patients we see coming in so sick, and kind of noticing, or at least acknowledging, that this is more of a symptom rather than a cause, that the sickness of our people, which oddly enough in the United States is so vast in terms of the diseases we have, or the maladies we have. These are symptoms. Of course this will happen. Of course this will happen when we have just a couple corporations controlling all of our food, and they don't care. They want to maximize profits, right? So to me, the biggest thing is food. Maybe because I somehow ended up as the food lady. I didn't see that one coming, but I think because it's just such a core thing, is that in our language, it's chi, which means the energy that you eat. It's the energy. And so what are we eating? How are we eating? Who are we eating? Honoring these beings that give their lives every day for us to live. And so I think that's not a very good answer to your question, because I'm not giving you any clear action steps to give, but I would say, if it's possible, as if doctors and nurses and healthcare workers aren't already overextended and overworked, to build as many gardens as you build operating rooms. You know, like those gardens are so important, and localizing our food systems is so important. And food is medicine, as they say, and really healing from the inside out, and involving your patients in the creation of those gardens, because that will heal them too, getting their hands in the soil, etc. So there's the food cause of our illness and disease. And then of course, Teddy and I were also talking about the trauma cause. My people believe that a lot of diseases are from a emotional, spiritual wound that can sometimes manifest as a physical wound. And so that gets into ceremony, healing, prayer, and very specialized knowledge that a lot of us don't have. How do you heal a woman from something that happened to her that she didn't want to happen to her? How do you heal a man from watching his mom get beat up when he was a little boy? And these things are really important. They drive so much of our behaviors. That's one of the deepest spiritual wounds we say that a man can suffer, is watching the women in his family get harmed and he can't do anything about it. That's just pure torture for a man. And so how do you help him understand it wasn't his fault? How do you help the woman understand that, oh, that night when someone put something in your drink, that was not your fault? These are some real traumas we're carrying around in a society of abuse. So on one hand, you have to heal the physical through the food, through the water, through the physical nourishment. On the other hand, you have to heal the spiritual. These wounds that we carry that generally always boil down to some kind of shame. Healing shame, composting shame is so important. Releasing judgment of ourselves. I mean, that's the most crippling thing that we carry is shame. Oh, I did this, or I was a part of that, or, the men who come back from war, that's crippling. Sometimes it's more scarring to kill someone than it is to be killed, So I guess that's a long way of saying that personally, I think that all of the causes that many doctors are trained to believe are the causes of illness are not the causes. And that we have to address these larger systemic issues of our food systems, our water systems, and our spiritual systems. And so I really invite healthcare workers to be multidimensional beings, to be people who not only check the pulse and prescribe the pills and et cetera, but people who, I'm a musician, I'm a PhD, I'm a community organizer, I'm a poet. And I really invite all of you to remember you don't have to be just one thing when you grow up. You can be so many things. And your nurse hat is maybe only one hat you wear. Maybe your other hats are you run sweat lodges, you run ceremonies. That always has to be done in tandem with your medical practice, I think. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. I can tell you folks are picking up on the planetary health domains because this is a wonderful systems thinking complexity question. And I've recently been to an environmental lecture and they said that fire is really bad for the air and contributes to air pollution. Any comment on how you balance that benefit of fire and the harm that it can do?
Right. Again, we wouldn't have these massive catastrophic fires if we legalized burning again. Even in the 1500s, when the Spanish missionaries were in California, they were incarcerating California natives for burning the land. And Smokey the Bear comes in, right? That guy bugs me so much. Maddening. Like, you don't even know. But the US forestry, they actually deliberately did a maximizing trees per acre policy. Can we blame that instead of fire for what's going on? You maximize trees per acre for timber purposes, etc. There's all kinds of I won't get into it, but there's a lot of environmental problems that happen when Smokey the Bear people come in and say we got to maximize trees per acre in the national forests. They just didn't understand. They're starting to, because the whole thing's going up in flames, literally. So I just go back to that thing of like small, low intensity burns prevent large catastrophic burns. Small, low intensity burns sequester carbon in the soil because they augment soil organic matter. They augment microbial activity. A lot of the carbon stored in the soil is from mycelium networks, carbon networks. And so when we burn, we're actually sinking carbon as well as emitting carbon. And that's not to mention if that carbon then turns into deer, turns into buffalo, the buffalo is a lot of carbon. If we have those bison populations, those herbivore populations healthy and thriving, which they only thrive off of luscious, luxuriant grasslands, then creating grasslands is really part and parcel of sinking carbon. So I actually wanted to do a study, and there actually have been conversations about, okay, is this emitting more carbon than it sinks? And I think when you have these massive crown fires where you have these overgrown forests, including right here in Minnesota, they used to burn this whole area, and in some places still do. But that whole like uniform pine forest where everything's tall and skinny because it's not allowed to billow out because it's fighting for the canopy, it's fighting for the sunlight. That's how they grow, tall and skinny. That's not actually natural, or it's just as unnatural as sometimes what we don't do has as much of an effect as when we do take action. So when we don't burn, that's almost us creating a different kind of forest than if we do burn. So it's not like we're letting nature take its course necessarily when we don't burn, because we're actually letting it we're creating something when we don't burn. We're creating an overgrown forest, and that's just as much a human creation as when we do thin it properly. So I guess that's all to say that I think whatever lecture you are listening to was definitely talking about these catastrophic fires, which I agree are not ideal because they actually harm the soil. If it's too hot, you can kill everything in the soil. So the soil becomes hydrophobic. Water will come and just splash right off. It doesn't sink in. So it is actually really important to keep in check the intensity of the fires. And that is done ironically, by burning. If we reduce the fuel load consistently, but that's also hard. But if we often talk about the population problem, like, oh, there's too many humans. I'm like, well, get them on the land and burning a little bit. Like, that would turn a problem into a solution. It's kind of hard to imagine returning the continent to its former state because it took a lot of manpower, woman power, people power to do all this stuff. But when you think about how many people we have, we actually do have that manpower. We just have to organize and implement our muscles together.
Clearly, there's a lot of appreciation for how you explained everything so well, and how you communicated that Indigenous keeping of the land, stewarding of the land is really a wonderful direction we want to move. So people wanted to know, do you recommend any particular programs that are for land back to Indigenous nations?
Particular programs for land back to Indigenous nations. I think there's a lot of them. There's one cool one called the Shumi land tax in the Bay Area. It's a voluntary land tax, so you can pay basically rent to the local tribes for living and squatting on traditional Ohlone homelands. So I think you could easily implement that here, and that fund goes towards buying lands for the local peoples, buying little chunks of Oakland back, chunks of the North Bay. And so I really like that system of like paying taxes to Indigenous nations, local nations, which is then that fund is pooled to do regenerative stuff such as land back. And then some people say, well, is it really land back if you have to pay for it? That's a fair argument. I think land back there's different types. I'm not the expert on it, but obviously there's federal lands that could be returned. The 10 Palms, the Joshua Tree National Forest. Is it 29 Palms? 29 Palms, did I say that right? There's a tribe called 29 Palms, I believe, or some number of palms, is now co-managing Joshua Tree with the National Forest. So co-management is also kind of like, really, you're just gonna let us have a piece of the management of our own lands? But it's better than no say in how it's managed. So there's some exciting co-management things going on where national forests are sharing the auspices of the stewarding of certain land with tribes. Then you have private lands, not federal lands, but private lands where churches are giving away hundreds of acres at a time, not giving away, giving back. Universities are giving back lands. You have, in my case, several people have said, hey, we have this land and we want to make you the inheritor of it when we die. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll probably give it back to the Ute because I'm not from there, but I will steward it to the right people. So there's all kinds of interesting little bubbling land back things going on that have different contexts and different people and legal frameworks of lands that are being given back. But yeah, I think in general, it's one of my policy recommendations that I have on my other presentations, which is like, if these softwares are still extant in these native nations, then probably land back is one of the most effective things we can do to augment biodiversity, to augment. You probably heard that statistic that native peoples only oversee 20% of the land's or the world's land, but oversee 80% of the world's biodiversity. So indigenous peoples, as they defined it, people who've been on somewhere for thousands of years, are only 5% of the global population by that definition. But they're overseeing 80% of the global biodiversity in these hotspots. So arguably, if we want to help biodiversity, maybe we should give some land back to the native peoples. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
This is a very important and heartfelt question. What are your thoughts about how we repair the trauma and to move forward together in respect and understanding?
Yeah. Well, I'm a half white woman, so I think as white folks, we have to find safe spaces for us to process the shame, frankly, because that shame can be so paralyzing and scary, right? Um, and maybe we need to create safe spaces to do that on our own, so that we can be available to our brothers and sisters who are of different demographics. Because I think the thing that prevents most, and I'm kind of framing it within whiteness, because I think a lot of the trauma is resultant of extractive white supremacist structures. And so we as white folks, as you are all are doing with your truth report, we have to reckon with that. But in order to reckon with it effectively and without getting defensive or unproductive or ineffective, I think we have to compost our shame and realize that we don't have to bring that with us on this journey. So I'll give you an example. So as a Dene woman, we actually used to raid the Pueblos, the neighboring tribes, and enslave them, frankly. And I remember as a little girl, I went to a Pueblo school. The Pueblo tribes are more sedentary. We move around. And they said, oh, and then the Navajos came and they just took all our food and all of our women and children. And I was like 10 years old and I thought, we didn't do that. Because I was the only Navajo girl in the class. Like, they don't know what they're talking. It was just this pure denial. I went straight into denial. Like, that didn't happen, And it's just fascinating. It took me like 10 years to finally be like, okay, maybe we did that. And I think that's a really similar journey of what white America is going through, right? It's like one of the first impulses is to either deny or put it in some box somewhere where you don't have to think about it, or just pretend it didn't happen, or like really lean into it and say, oh, we conquered and tamed this great land. And, that's what Trump said. We tamed the land. And it's like, really? Genocide is taming the land? I don't know about that. But so anyways, that little girl who denied it, I finally got to the point where I'm like, wait a second, we did, okay, we did it. We raided, we stole, we enslaved. So now when I go to Pueblo, whenever I perform in front of Pueblo people, even though technically I am part Pueblo, from my clan, I always say I'm sorry. And I say, look, I take responsibility for or I don't take responsibility. I acknowledge my ancestors' actions. We raided, we stole, we plundered, and that wasn't right. That sentence, that wasn't right, is healing to people. That wasn't right. And then I say, and to make up for it, even though I wasn't the one who did it, I want to make up for it. And I want to heal this relationship. So I therefore am dedicating my life to your elders and your children and making the world better for them in whatever way I can. And so I write articles for Pueblo language schools. I get them funding, I do whatever little things I can do to be supportive of them. My brother grows corn for them because he married a Pueblo woman who's really setting him straight. And and so we're doing our penance, if you will. And I think there's no shame when I do that. There's actually excitement. There's joy. It's like, awesome. I get to do this. I get to heal this. I get to be a part of composting this. I get to me, it becomes an exciting journey rather than like a chore. Like, oh shoot, I got to do reparations now. It's like, yay, I get to do reparations. Thank you for making me the generation who was born to heal these cycles of trauma. Thank you, Creator. Thank you for letting me be a part of that. What an honor. How exciting. And I feel like there's a spirit of that in Minnesota more than most places. But yeah, obviously it's a journey. It's not like oh, we healed the trauma one day, right? It's a journey we have to take together, and it's going to be messy. It's going to be hard, but I think the more we can not react in shame and instead react in repair and love for ourselves and others, the more that trauma can be healed. Yeah.